I know I'm innocent, Jerry knows he's innocent, we know each other are innocent. And that to me, it was actually quite calming, because I thought, we're innocent, we're totally innocent.
In 2007, Kate McCann was questioned by Portuguese police about the disappearance of her daughter, Madeleine. Out of 49 questions, she answered just one. She refused to explain where she searched, what she touched, or why she immediately claimed abduction. No explanation, no emotion, no cooperation. Was it legal advice, or was she hiding something far more serious? When a mother chooses silence over clarity in the face of tragedy, it's not just a legal move, it's a statement. And in this case, silence became her loudest answer. On the night of May 3, 2007, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann vanished from her family's holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were dining with friends at a nearby restaurant called the Tapas Bar, part of the Ocean Club Resort complex. That night would become one of the most scrutinized in modern criminal history, not just because of the child's sudden disappearance, but because of the peculiar behaviors and contradictions that emerged in its immediate aftermath. As police began reconstructing the events of that evening, one fact became clear: the timeline provided by the McCanns and their friends, known as the Tapas 7, was riddled with gaps and inconsistencies. But even more troubling than missing minutes was the nature of Kate McCann's behavior and statements during and after Madeleine's disappearance. These were not merely emotional reactions under stress. They were omissions, contradictions, and decisions that raised red flags even among experienced investigators. One of the earliest contradictions came from something seemingly simple: whether the front door to apartment 5A was locked. According to Jerry McCann, the door was locked when he last checked on the children. But Kate's account was different. She said the door was left unlocked so they could enter easily during their checks. This discrepancy may seem minor at first, but it carried significant implications. If the front door was indeed locked, as Jerry claimed, then how could an abductor have entered without forcing entry? And if it was left unlocked, as Kate insisted, then why did they say they had secured the apartment for their children's safety? Portuguese investigators viewed this as a major red flag. Inconsistencies in such basic details suggested the possibility that the story of a break-in or abduction might have been fabricated, or at the very least, staged. The official case files point out this contradiction explicitly, noting that both Kate and Jerry gave differing versions about how they entered and exited the apartment to check on their children. Such discrepancies led to serious questions. Was there really a break-in? Or was the scene constructed to look like one? Moreover, if Kate's version is accurate, and the door was indeed unlocked, this would imply a gross negligence on the part of the parents, leaving 3 small children unattended in an unlocked apartment while dining elsewhere. Either way, the contradiction undermined the credibility of both parents and planted early seeds of doubt in the minds of investigators. Another puzzling behavior that night was Kate McCann's reaction upon discovering that Madeleine was missing. According to her own statement, when she realized the bed was empty, she didn't call out for Madeleine or attempt to search the apartment thoroughly. Instead, she ran out of the apartment and back to the tapas restaurant to inform Jerry and their friends. Notably, she didn't use a phone, even though phones were available at the resort reception, and the restaurant itself likely had one. The McCanns' own mobile phones were left in the apartment, an odd decision considering they were leaving their children unattended. Witnesses recall that Kate burst into the restaurant shouting, "They've taken her?" A declaration that struck many as strangely definitive, especially for someone who, at that point, had not fully searched the apartment or checked other possibilities. Why didn't she shout from the balcony? The tapas restaurant was close enough to be visible from the apartment, according to their own statements. If she had screamed from the veranda, the others might have heard her immediately, eliminating the delay caused by physically running to the restaurant. But she didn't. She ran. And she yelled that Madeleine had been taken, not that she was missing. This behavior raised profound questions. Was this a mother acting in panic or a mother acting out a script? If your child had just vanished, would your instinct be to flee the scene and announce an abduction, or to remain inside, tear through the apartment, and scream for help? The failure to use a phone, the choice not to shout from the balcony, and the immediate leap to, "They've taken her," form a trio of actions that do not align with what many consider a natural, unfiltered parental response. Instead, these actions appeared rehearsed, intentional rather than impulsive. Perhaps the most baffling element of Kate McCann's behavior that night was her response during the initial search for Madeleine. According to multiple sources and witness testimonies, Kate did not join the others in actively searching the area. Instead, she reportedly sat down on Madeleine's bed and remained there, motionless, while the rest of the group fanned out to look for the child. Several of the Tapas 7, along with Ocean Club staff and Portuguese locals, were searching around the resort grounds, looking under vehicles, checking nearby buildings, and walking the beach. Meanwhile, Kate was reportedly frozen inside the apartment. This inaction led to intense speculation. Was she paralyzed by shock and trauma? That's one explanation, but some have offered a more troubling theory: Kate didn't search because she already knew Madeleine wasn't there. In this view, her stillness wasn't the result of grief. It was the calm of someone who no longer had anything to look for. When considered alongside the previous behaviors, the locked vs. unlocked door, the lack of urgency in calling for help, and the rushed claim of abduction, Kate's passivity inside the apartment becomes all the more chilling. Investigators later noted this detail in official reports, and commentators have returned to it time and again as one of the most confounding aspects of the case. The contradictions in Kate McCann's behavior may not amount to direct evidence, but they create a troubling portrait. Taken individually, each detail might be explained away: stress, confusion, panic. But when viewed collectively, they suggest something deeper, a version of events that doesn't add up, a narrative that, rather than becoming clearer over time, has only grown murkier. What remains is a portrait of a night filled with silence, misdirection, and uncertainty. A night when a mother, instead of providing answers, left investigators with 48 unanswered questions and a trail of doubts that has persisted for over 16 years. Was Kate McCann simply a heartbroken mother in shock? Or was her silence the most revealing clue of all? When Portuguese police sat down with Kate McCann on September 7, 2007, they were not expecting a confession. What they needed were answers, basic ones. Clarifications, observations, factual recollections. The kind of questions that, if your child had gone missing, you would assume any parent would be eager to answer. But Kate McCann, facing 49 questions, refused to respond to 48. And among those were some of the most elementary, non-accusatory, easily verifiable questions imaginable. Take, for instance, did you search inside the bedroom wardrobe? It's a straightforward yes or no question. A practical one. The wardrobe was part of the room where Madeleine had vanished. Any concerned parent would likely tear through every drawer, closet, or cupboard in a panic. But Kate didn't respond. There was no explanation, no acknowledgement, just silence. The next question followed naturally. Can you describe its contents? At this point in the interview, the police even showed Kate photographs of the bedroom wardrobe to prompt her memory. This wasn't about speculation or accusation. It was a simple request to describe what was in plain sight. Still, Kate refused. Her silence, in this case, felt less like legal protection and more like avoidance. With visual evidence in front of her, what was she afraid to confirm? Another basic inquiry came when officers asked, who contacted the authorities? Again, this was a procedural question, not one tied to guilt or motive. The timeline of events, and who made the call to police, could easily be verified through call logs and witness statements. Why refuse to answer? Such avoidance made it appear as though even the most factual elements of the night were being shielded from scrutiny. Who took part in the searches? Was another question that should have been easy to answer. Multiple people were present at the scene. If Kate had joined the search herself, she could have listed names and locations. Instead, she declined to respond. This omission became more suspicious in light of later testimony suggesting that Kate did not actively participate in the initial search, but instead remained seated on Madeleine's bed, motionless, while others looked. Even more troubling was her refusal to answer. Did any neighbor offer you help? According to witnesses, including a woman named Mrs. Fenn, who lived in the apartment above, a neighbor did in fact interact with the McCanns that night and even offered assistance. Mrs. Fenn's statement, later made public, included her recollection of hearing Kate wailing like an animal and offering Jerry use of her phone. Kate's unwillingness to acknowledge this neighbor's involvement suggested either a desire to distance herself from witness accounts or a fear that the neighbor's version of events might contradict her own. Then came two deeply personal but non-threatening questions. What was Madeleine's behavior like? And what was her relationship like with her siblings? These are questions designed to provide psychological and emotional context to a child's life. They are questions any parent could answer with compassion, even in the worst of circumstances. But again, Kate remained silent. Why would a mother not want to describe her missing daughter? Her temperament, her quirks, her relationships. If she were hoping the world would help find her child, wouldn't these be the details worth sharing? It's crucial to understand that these weren't trick questions. They weren't accusatory. They didn't demand legal precision or place blame. They were gentle, factual, human. And still, Kate refused. Some have defended her silence, citing legal advice or emotional trauma. But others argue that her blanket refusal, especially on these harmless topics, feels less like legal strategy and more like calculated suppression. By not answering the easy questions, she not only denied investigators the opportunity to build a clear timeline, but also created the perception that she had something to hide. In most criminal cases, it's the complex questions, the ones that could incriminate, that suspects tend to dodge. Kate's refusal to even acknowledge who helped her or what her daughter's relationship with her siblings was suggests a deeper fear, not of prosecution, but of contradiction. Perhaps the facts, however simple, could unravel a larger narrative. And so, what began as a routine interview quickly became something else entirely, a study in silence. A silence that was not passive, but deliberate, strategic, controlled. And in that silence, investigators heard something louder than words: resistance, deflection, and possibly guilt. What did you see, do, or touch when you entered the apartment? This was perhaps the most crucial question of all. When you walk into a room where your 3-year-old daughter is supposed to be sleeping, and she's gone, what do you see? What do you touch? What's your first instinct? These are fundamental questions for any investigation. Yet when asked directly, when you entered the apartment, what did you see? What did you do? Where did you look? What did you touch? Kate offered no answer. There was no description of the room's condition, no insight into whether the windows were open or closed, no mention of what she may have touched: door handles, bed covers, drawers, curtains. She said nothing. That silence erased the possibility of reconstructing the moment she discovered her daughter was missing. And more troubling, it denied investigators the chance to validate or disprove key forensic elements: fingerprints, blood traces, fibers. By refusing to clarify what she had touched, she left open the possibility that any forensic evidence found could be explained away as accidental or untraceable. But of all the questions she refused to answer, the most revealing were the ones tied directly to the scene of the disappearance. These weren't hypothetical or speculative. They were grounded in physical evidence, observable facts, and the natural expectations of any parent faced with such a crisis. And yet, in each of these moments, Kate McCann chose silence. That silence didn't end with the basics. It extended to small but significant physical details, like the curtain behind the sofa. Why was the curtain behind the sofa tampered with? Investigators found that the curtain near the window behind the sofa had been disturbed, moved in a way that seemed inconsistent with natural airflow or passive activity. It was a subtle but potentially significant clue. Had someone hidden behind the sofa? Had someone tried to exit through the window? Or had it been staged to give that impression? When presented with this anomaly and asked directly, why was the curtain behind the sofa tampered with? Kate again chose not to answer. This question was not accusatory. It was observational. It focused on a known, photographed piece of physical evidence. By refusing to address it, Kate avoided the risk of contradicting herself or revealing knowledge that she was not supposed to have. But in doing so, she also avoided an opportunity to help investigators eliminate certain scenarios. Her silence invited only speculation. Was this a detail she knew about in advance? Was it something she didn't want to explain? While investigators puzzled over the state of the room, they were equally stunned by Kate's emotional leap. Before a search had even begun, before a window was checked or a closet opened, she made a declaration that would define the entire case. Why did you immediately say Madeleine had been abducted? One of the earliest and most controversial moments in this case was Kate's reaction after discovering Madeleine missing. Instead of calling out for her daughter or suggesting that the child might have wandered off, she ran back to the restaurant and screamed, "They've taken her!" Police found this deeply unusual. How could a mother jump to the conclusion of abduction so quickly, without evidence of forced entry or a thorough search? So they asked her, "Why did you say from the start that Madeleine had been abducted?" She refused to answer. That refusal avoided the psychological analysis investigators were seeking. Was her conclusion emotional, informed, preconceived, or perhaps rehearsed? Most parents, when a child disappears, operate in stages: panic, search, denial, hope. But Kate skipped all of that. Her immediate certainty struck police not just as odd, but suspicious. But actions speak louder than words. And when it came to searching for her daughter, Kate's behavior raised even more questions than her words had. Where did you search for Madeleine? Another key behavioral question, simple and vital. During the searches, where did you look for Madeleine? How? In what way? The assumption would be that a frantic parent would tear through the apartment, calling out her child's name, searching every corner and closet. Yet reports from the night suggest that Kate remained in the apartment, sitting on Madeleine's bed, while others, including friends and staff, searched the premises and surroundings. Her refusal to explain where she looked only reinforced the image of a mother detached from the most instinctive of all reactions, actively searching for her missing child. Was it shock? Was it trauma? Or was it the knowledge that the search would be futile? The oddities didn't stop with Kate. Investigators soon turned their attention to the twins, two toddlers who slept through a storm of chaos. Why did the twins not wake up during the commotion? 2-year-old twins slept in the same room where Madeleine had vanished. Amid the chaos, the screams, the shouts, the running feet, they didn't stir. Even when carried upstairs later, they remained asleep. Police asked, why didn't the twins wake up during that search? Again, Kate said nothing. For many, this silence suggested something darker. Were the children sedated? Had they been medicated that evening to sleep through the night? Both Kate and Jerry were doctors. Kate, notably, had pediatric experience. While there's no direct proof that the children were sedated, the question deserved an honest answer. Her refusal left it hanging in the air like smoke, evidence of something unspoken. While the children slept, the media was already awake, almost unnaturally fast, and investigators wanted to know why. Did you call Sky News? Strangely, media arrived at the scene shockingly fast. Sky News and other outlets were on location the following morning, May 4. Even more curious, a major British newspaper published the first story about Madeleine's disappearance 1 minute after midnight, just 2 hours after Kate claimed to have discovered her daughter missing. So police ask, did you call Sky News? Once again, no response. If Kate did contact the press before or immediately after calling police, that would suggest an unusual prioritization of narrative management over investigative urgency. This was not about grief, it was about control. The refusal to clarify this point only deepened the suspicion that media coverage was being coordinated from the start. Did you ask for a priest? One of the most haunting unanswered questions in the interview was, "Did you ask for a priest?" According to multiple reports, a local priest was contacted early on, and the McCanns were even granted keys to the village church, a rare privilege. Why does this matter? Because rumors circulated that Kate had confessed something to the priest under the seal of confession, a sacrament that, in the Catholic tradition, cannot be breached, even in the face of a criminal investigation. One priest allegedly told a confidant he would take her confession to the grave. This may all be hearsay, but Kate's refusal to answer this question allowed it to flourish. Then there was the testimony of Jane Tanner, Kate's friend and dinner companion that night, whose account could have supported the abduction theory. But even there, Kate withheld confirmation. Did Jane Tanner tell you she saw a man carrying a child? Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7, claimed she saw a man carrying a child away from the apartment around the time Madeleine was believed to have gone missing. This claim became a central part of the abduction theory. But when police asked Kate directly, "Did Jane tell you that night she saw a man with a child?" she declined to answer. This wasn't a technical question. It was about a friend's eyewitness account. One that, if true, could support Kate's own version of events. So why not confirm it? Her refusal created the impression that she didn't believe Jane's story, or feared acknowledging it might expose further inconsistencies. Through it all, 8 critical questions directly tied to the crime scene, the timeline, the behavior of everyone involved. Kate said nothing. Except once. Out of 49 questions, Kate McCann answered just one. Are you aware that in not answering the questions you are jeopardizing the investigation which seeks to discover what happened to your daughter? Her response: yes. If that's what the investigation thinks. There was no apology, no sorrow, no pleading, no, I want to help, just a flat, conditional acknowledgement. The language is distancing, cold, emotionless. It does not say, I understand. It says, if that's what you think. It places the burden back on the investigators and subtly challenges their authority. From a psychological perspective, the refusal to engage with the most critical, tangible questions of the investigation speaks volumes. Parents of missing children, especially innocent ones, usually want to be cleared as quickly as possible. They want to help. They want to find their child. But Kate's silence was not passive. It was precise, controlled, legal, perhaps, but also profoundly unsettling. In criminal psychology, silence can be a shield, but it can also be a mirror. And in this case, what it reflects is a narrative that cannot hold its own weight under questioning. A version of events that, when pressed, cannot withstand the light. The questions Kate McCann refused to answer weren't designed to trap her. They were designed to find her daughter. And by not answering them, she did more than stall an investigation. She redefined it. As investigators dug deeper into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, they began to look beyond what was said and focus more on what was not. Silence, inconsistencies, and behavior that defied instinct began to form a troubling backdrop. But among the most overlooked and revealing anomalies was something cold, clinical, and technical: the phone records. The phone data, specifically from Kate McCann, contained gaps, erasures, missing links in a timeline where every second mattered. And those missing links came not just at random, but precisely when the stakes were highest. According to case documents published, Kate McCann deleted the majority of her call history after arriving in Portugal on April 28, 2007. This in itself raised eyebrows. But the real alarm came when investigators zeroed in on May 3, 2007, the night Madeleine disappeared. Between 11:14 p.m. and 11:17 p.m., Jerry McCann placed 4 separate calls to Kate's mobile phone. These calls came just over an hour after Kate had raised the alarm about her missing daughter. Of those 4 calls, 3 were deleted from Kate's device. Only 1 remained. There was no official explanation provided by Kate, and when questioned by Portuguese police later that year, she refused to discuss her phone activity. The act of deleting phone calls in and of itself is not incriminating. People delete messages and calls for many reasons: privacy, storage, clutter. But in a high-stakes criminal investigation involving the disappearance of a child, any deletion, especially one that occurs within minutes of the incident, becomes deeply suspect. Why delete 3 out of 4 calls, all made within a span of 3 minutes? Why delete any of them at all? And why those specific ones? The timestamps, 23:14 to 23:17, place the calls right after the window in which Madeleine was believed to have vanished. According to their own account, Kate discovered Madeleine missing at approximately 10 p.m., then ran to the tapas restaurant to alert Jerry and their friends. The group began searching. Yet nearly an hour later, Jerry was making multiple calls to his wife. Was she separated from the group at that point? Were they discussing how to handle the situation? Was someone else on the phone with her? And most importantly, what was said in those calls that compelled her to erase them? The deletions robbed investigators of a potential key to understanding what unfolded in those vital minutes. If the contents were innocent, logistics, panic, desperate discussion, why not leave them intact? The mystery deepens when we go back one day earlier, to May 2, 2007. On that day, Kate received a call from an unidentified number in Swansea, United Kingdom. She later claimed it was a wrong number, a harmless misdeal. But curiously, this was one of the few calls she did not delete from her phone. In fact, nearly every other call was removed, except this one. That alone raised questions. But what came next raised them even higher. According to research published on the Jill Havern Forum, an online repository of independent investigations and discussion into the case, a call was also placed that same day from a mobile number registered in Praia da Luz to that same Swansea number. That's right, a line in Portugal called the same Swansea number that had called Kate. It's important to note that this Praia da Luz number did not belong to Kate, nor to Jerry, nor to any of the Tapas 7. Its owner has never been identified. The number was not affiliated with the Ocean Club Resort, nor with local police or medical services. Portuguese police, aware of the odd connection, requested help from British authorities in identifying the owner. To date, no match has been publicly disclosed. So here's what we have. The day before Madeleine went missing, a number in Swansea called Kate McCann. That same day, a number in Praia da Luz, the town where the McCanns were staying, called that exact same Swansea number. A triangular link, a closed loop, and no clear explanation. Kate claimed the Swansea call was a mistake. But if it was, why save it? Why not delete that too, along with the others? Why preserve a meaningless call, but erase 3 calls from your husband on the night your daughter disappears? This sequence raises the possibility that the Swansea, Praia da Luz connection may have involved a third party, one outside the family, but connected to events behind the scenes. Was this an accidental trail left behind? Or was it part of a plan? One of the most significant red flags in any investigation is selectivity, the act of deleting only some data while leaving other pieces untouched. This indicates a conscious choice. Kate did not wipe her entire call log. She selectively deleted calls that had contextual importance. Those from her husband immediately after the disappearance. She kept a call from a stranger, claimed to be irrelevant. This behavior is not consistent with someone cleaning their phone for privacy or convenience. It suggests something far more deliberate: information management. Had she simply wanted to avoid scrutiny, she could have deleted everything, erased all records, and claimed she didn't remember. But by deleting only select calls, she inadvertently created a pattern, and with it, suspicion. According to statements cited in the case files, on May 3, 3 of the 4 calls from Jerry McCann between 23:14 and 23:17 were deleted from Kate McCann's mobile phone. This suggests an intention to conceal information. That statement wasn't made by a journalist or forum user. It came from the official investigative dossier compiled by the Portuguese police. Was Kate McCann's phone behavior innocent, or something far more deliberate? There are 2 opposing ways to interpret the pattern of deletions in her call log. From a charitable perspective, perhaps Kate routinely deleted her phone history as a matter of personal privacy. The call from Swansea could genuinely have been a wrong number. And in the chaos and trauma of losing her daughter, she may not have given any thought to what was worth keeping or erasing. But the more suspicious interpretation is harder to ignore. It suggests she deliberately removed specific calls that may have captured panic, coordination, or even planning. The Swansea number, especially in connection with a mysterious call from Praia da Luz, may point to a third party never publicly identified. And the calls that remained, versus those that were erased, hint at a selective process, keeping only what was safe, removing what was not. When viewed in isolation, these actions could be dismissed. But when considered alongside her refusal to answer 48 out of 49 police questions, her lack of physical involvement in the initial search, and her inconsistent statements about basic elements like locked doors and blowing curtains, the phone deletions begin to seem less like oversight and more like obfuscation. In the end, they read like the digital equivalent of staying silent. Why erase anything at all? It's a fair question. If there was nothing to hide, no improper discussions, no shady arrangements, why erase anything? And why, of all the calls to retain, keep the one from a supposed stranger? Why leave the lone surviving call from your husband, but delete the rest? Why does a woman whose child has vanished treat her phone log like a document that needs editing? If you're trying to find your missing daughter, you welcome every trace, every timestamp, every detail that can help reconstruct the night. You don't curate what the police can see. You open everything, unless there's something in there that you'd rather they didn't. Kate McCann's behavior during the investigation has often been criticized for being silent, distant, even evasive. Her refusal to answer dozens of police questions made headlines. But silence isn't just verbal. It can be digital too. Deleting a phone call is the digital equivalent of saying, "That conversation never happened." But in a criminal investigation, every erased detail leaves behind a shadow. The phone data doesn't prove guilt, but it certainly doesn't prove innocence either. Instead, it paints a portrait, one of selective memory, intentional concealment, and a pattern of choices made not under pressure, but under calculation. In a case where a child vanished without a trace, even the smallest traces left behind in a phone can speak volumes. And sometimes, what's missing from the record says more than what remains. In any high-profile missing person case, there comes a point where facts alone are no longer enough. Witness statements grow thin, physical evidence fades, and the investigation enters a phase where every word, every sentence, must be examined not just for what it says, but for what it hides. This is where Peter Hyatt steps in. Peter Hyatt is a professional statement analyst, a specialist in the field of linguistic forensics. For over 2 decades, Hyatt has worked on criminal investigations, cold cases, and media interviews, decoding the language of suspects, witnesses, and victims. His approach is neither mystical nor speculative. It is systematic, rooted in principles of behavioral linguistics and human psychology. According to Hyatt, the truth has a rhythm, so does deception. And by analyzing how someone speaks, or more crucially, what they avoid saying, we can uncover clues that might otherwise go unnoticed. When Hyatt turned his attention to the case of Madeleine McCann, he wasn't working for the police. He had no subpoena power or access to classified evidence. What he had was something else: a recorded interview, a transcript, and his method. At the core of Peter Hyatt's process is statement analysis, a discipline that examines the language people use when describing events, especially those involving trauma, guilt, or deception. While the general public may focus on what is said, Hyatt focuses on how it's said. His method looks for specific indicators: word choice. Does the speaker use distancing language? Do they soften impact with vague terms? Pronoun usage. Is the subject taking personal ownership or deflecting responsibility using group identifiers like wa or us? Verb tense. Do they switch between past and present inconsistently? Omissions. What is conspicuously left out? What should be said, but isn't? He also pays attention to unexpected changes in narrative, repetition, and contextual shifts, subtle elements that can betray stress, fear, or fabrication. Hyatt is quick to clarify statement analysis does not tell you what happened. It tells you whether the person believes what they're saying. In 2011, Kate and Jerry McCann sat down for a televised interview on Australian TV. It was not their first, but by this point, 4 years after Madeleine's disappearance, the public was still divided. Some saw grieving parents, others saw a polished facade. Peter Hyatt watched the interview, not as a journalist, not as a detective, but as an analyst. He was not in the room, he did not ask the questions, but he had everything he needed: their words. As Hyatt dissected the footage, several red flags emerged. One of the first things Hyatt noted was how the McCanns handled direct references to Madeleine. When asked about her disappearance, they often shifted topics, pivoting to the investigation, public perception, or legal hurdles. This was, to Hyatt, a classic example of emotional avoidance. A mother speaking about a missing child, he argued, typically shows visible emotional strain when revisiting the memory, especially if they believe the child is alive. But Kate and Jerry, he noted, showed linguistic detachment. Calm, measured, composed, too composed. Another telling pattern involved pronoun use. When discussing moments of responsibility, checking the children, deciding to dine out, or searching after the disappearance, Kate and Jerry consistently used "wa," even in contexts where individual actions were clearly distinguishable. This, according to Hyatt, signaled an attempt to dilute individual accountability. It blurred the lines of who did what when. For example, instead of saying, "I checked on Madeleine," the phrasing was often, "We were checking on the children." That subtle shift, Hyatt believed, was not accidental. Perhaps the most damning omission, in Hyatt's view, was the failure to say the most basic, painful truth: Madeleine is missing. At no point in the interview, he claimed, did Kate directly state that her daughter was gone. Instead, she relied on circumlocution, phrases like, "when everything happened," or "since that night." The reluctance to name the trauma was, to Hyatt, a form of psychological distancing, suggesting either denial or deceit. Finally, Hyatt remarked on the absence of raw emotional expression. The cadence of speech remained steady. There was little fluctuation in tone, few visible facial expressions of grief. While it's dangerous to judge emotion purely on appearance, Hyatt emphasized the mismatch between content and delivery. If your daughter was taken, and you believe she is alive, Hyatt noted, you don't speak like a spokesperson. You speak like a parent. Your voice breaks. Your language gets messy. These interviews were too controlled. Based on his analysis of the McCann's language, Hyatt proposed a hypothesis, one that echoed among other independent observers. Madeleine may have died in the apartment. The cause, likely an accident, according to Hyatt. Perhaps she woke up, got out of bed, and fell. Or maybe she was over-sedated, something both Kate and Jerry, being medical professionals, would have had access to. The idea is not that they murdered her intentionally, but that they found her dead, and then made a fateful decision to cover it up. There was also, Hyatt admitted, a darker possibility: child abuse, either known or suspected. He was careful to note that this was speculative, based on linguistic markers, not physical evidence. Still, he argued that the level of deflection, detachment, and omission in their speech merited further investigation into every scenario, no matter how uncomfortable. It's important to clarify what Peter Hyatt's analysis is, and what it is not. It is not legal evidence. His findings are not admissible in court. His interpretations do not establish guilt. They raise questions, not verdicts. Even Hyatt himself acknowledges the limits of the method. Statement analysis, he argues, works best when used in conjunction with other forms of evidence: forensics, timelines, witness testimony. It's not a crystal ball, it's a tool. A psychological lens that can highlight inconsistencies before they grow into legal impossibilities. As with any subjective method, Hyatt's approach has its critics. Some argue that language is too fluid, too vulnerable to culture, class, personality, and trauma to make solid judgments. Others accuse Hyatt of inserting personal or political bias into his interpretations, claiming that his views are colored by broader agendas. Moreover, defenders of Kate and Jerry McCann point out that shock and exhaustion can manifest in unusual speech patterns. A person in grief might avoid direct references, not because they're guilty, but because they're trying not to collapse emotionally. In this context, Hyatt's conclusions, while provocative, can be seen as reading too much into too little. Still, Peter Hyatt's analysis remains one of the most widely circulated independent interpretations of the McCann case. His work has been shared, debated, and cited across forums, podcasts, and articles. Why? Because in the absence of hard evidence, we're left with words. And in cases like these, where the lines between victim and suspect blur, where grief and guilt wear the same face, language becomes a battleground. Did the McCanns lie? Did they lose control of the narrative? Did they rehearse a story to survive a truth they couldn't bear to face? We don't know. But Hyatt reminds us that sometimes, truth isn't just what people say, it's what they refuse to say. It's how they hesitate, how they shift pronouns, how they avoid names, facts, feelings. And in a case defined by mystery, confusion, and silence, perhaps it makes sense that our best clues come not from what we see, but from how we listen. In every unsolved mystery, especially one as globally dissected as the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, speculation arises to fill the void that evidence cannot reach. As time moves forward and hard leads dry up, theories take shape not only from facts but also from inconsistencies, behaviors, and silences. Some are outlandish. Others, though still speculative, are rooted in behavioral patterns and circumstantial logic. One such theory points directly at the mother Kate McCann. And it doesn't ask whether she killed her daughter. It asks something quieter. What if she knew and couldn't say? Among the more measured and widely circulated theories within independent investigative communities is the notion that Madeleine may have died as a result of an accident in the apartment, and that Kate, possibly with Jerry's help, covered it up out of fear and panic. The hypothetical accident could have taken many forms. Madeleine might have fallen from the bed, gotten hurt while trying to find her parents in the dark, or suffered an adverse reaction to sedation. A theory supported by several circumstantial observations. Both Kate and Jerry were doctors. Kate, in particular, had a medical background in anesthetics and pediatrics. She understood dosage, response, and risk. In this version of the theory, Madeleine's death was not intentional. It was tragic, unexpected. But what came next, the decision to conceal what happened, was deliberate. Supporters of this theory argue that the overwhelming fear of losing their remaining children, the twins, combined with guilt and professional consequences, may have driven Kate to silence. Under Portuguese law, negligence resulting in death could result not only in prison, but also in the loss of parental custody. For Kate, that risk may have been unbearable. Rather than face scandal, charges, and separation from her surviving children, she may have chosen a different path, one of calculated denial. A decision to fake an abduction. A window left open. A curtain said to be blowing. A story shared and memorized. It's a heavy accusation. But in a case where no intruder has ever been identified, no forced entry confirmed, and no reliable sighting of Madeleine exists after 9 p.m. that night, such a theory, while unproven, has refused to fade. A darker, more disturbing variation of the theory stems from the linguistic analysis of Peter Hyatt, the statement analyst who closely reviewed Kate and Jerry's interviews. Hyatt doesn't claim to know what happened. But based on avoidance behaviors, missing pronouns, and emotional detachment in their speech, he suggests that something beyond an accident may have occurred. Specifically, Hyatt points to the possibility of child abuse, not necessarily by the parents, but potentially within their circle of trust. His reasoning isn't built on physical evidence. There was none, but on patterns of language, the inability to refer to Madeleine by name, the lack of emotional congruence, and what he describes as the overuse of collective responsibility, to blur accountability. Again, it must be emphasized there is no forensic or legal evidence supporting this claim. It remains one of the more controversial and disputed aspects of independent analyses. Nonetheless, Hyatt's suggestion has been widely circulated and bitterly debated. Even among critics, his underlying question remains potent. Why do the McCanns, especially Kate, speak as though something far worse than an accident happened, and yet never name it? One of the more sensational aspects of the McCann case is the alleged involvement of political and secretive networks. Though often dismissed as conspiracy theory, these threads persist for a reason: certain connections were real and unusually convenient. Clarence Mitchell, who became the McCann family's official media spokesperson, had been the director of media monitoring for the British government. This was not a random PR agent. This was a man whose former job involved controlling narrative for the Prime Minister's office. Meanwhile, Jerry McCann has been allegedly linked to Freemasonry, though never officially confirmed. A particularly strange detail cited by investigators was a bouquet of flowers left at a memorial site for Madeleine, signed by Grand Priory Knights Templar, a group historically and symbolically tied to Freemasonry. Even more telling was the involvement of Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who reportedly maintained personal contact with the McCanns and pressured Portuguese authorities during key phases of the investigation. The theory here is not that Masonic orders orchestrated anything directly, but that Kate and Jerry were protected by a powerful network, one capable of redirecting media, stalling investigations, and reframing public perception. If Kate knew something terrible had happened, could she have stayed silent because she was advised to, or even warned? Was the story of a tragic accident rebranded, by allies with media and legal power, into a narrative of victimhood? The idea seems fantastical. But so does a 3-year-old disappearing from a locked apartment with no signs of forced entry and no conclusive evidence of kidnapping. Evidence of state-level involvement in the case is not just circumstantial. It's documented. After the McCanns were named arguidos, formal suspects, by Portuguese police, the British government arranged for them to fly back to the UK on a private EasyJet flight. From that moment on, all future questions from Portuguese investigators had to be submitted in advance through the Home Office and filtered via the McCann's legal team. Portuguese authorities reported that interrogation paths were blocked, warrants stalled, and media narratives shifted. It was as if the case had stopped being about a missing girl and started being about protecting public figures. If Kate knew the truth about an accident, a cover-up, or something worse, did the British state help suppress it? Was it damage control, protection of image, or simply a miscalculated act of compassion? Regardless, the optics were clear. Kate McCann, once the center of an international tragedy, became untouchable. This is the heart of the theory. The question that has haunted investigators, analysts, and followers of the case for years is deceptively simple, yet profoundly unsettling. What if Kate knew? And more than that, what if she wanted to speak, but couldn't? There are several plausible reasons for such silence, each more complex than the last. If Madeleine died by accident, Kate may have feared being charged with negligent homicide, the loss of her medical license, or worse, the permanent removal of her 2 remaining children. If the tragedy involved abuse at the hands of someone else, speaking out could have meant destroying her family or implicating powerful individuals. She may have been silenced, coerced, or emotionally paralyzed by guilt and shame. If Jerry knew more than he admitted, loyalty to her husband might have bound her to secrecy, knowing that exposing the truth could unravel their marriage and everything that remained of their lives. And if external forces, political, legal, or institutional, were involved, then perhaps Kate was convinced that silence was not only the safest option, but the only one. Psychologists refer to this kind of paralysis as trauma freeze, a condition where fear of the consequences overrides the natural impulse to speak out, even in the name of justice. For Kate McCann, the silence may not have been passive at all. It may have been calculated, protective, chosen. As one independent investigator once concluded, this silence was not passive. It was deliberate, strategic, controlled. Kate McCann remains, to this day, a polarizing figure. To some, she is a grieving mother, mercilessly hunted by tabloids and online trolls. To others, she is the key to a locked truth, one she has refused or been unable to reveal. Theories abound. Some are rational, some are not, but all stem from the same core tension. Kate's behavior doesn't match the script of innocence. Her silence, her deleted calls, her refusal to answer police questions, her inconsistent recollections of doors, curtains, sounds. These are not signs of someone trying to solve a mystery. These are signs of someone avoiding one. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was pressure. But if Kate McCann knew what happened to her daughter and stayed silent, then the tragedy of Madeleine is not just that she vanished. It's that the one person who could have told the truth chose not to. And that, above all, may be the heaviest burden any mother can carry. From the moment Madeleine McCann disappeared, her mother Kate became the center of global attention. To the press, to the public, and to the authorities, she was either a grieving mother or something more complicated. Over time, her image fractured into three lenses, each offering a different interpretation of who she was and what her silence meant. And each, in its own way, added fuel to one of the most polarizing missing child cases in modern history. In the early days, the British press, especially the tabloids, cast Kate as the anguished, devastated mother. Photos of her holding Madeleine's stuffed animal, eyes hollow and red, made the front pages of nearly every paper. She appeared fragile, poised on the edge of collapse. Sympathy poured in. Donations flooded the Find Madeleine Fund. But as the days turned into weeks and no new leads emerged, the media narrative shifted. Subtly at first, then with ruthless momentum. Soon, headlines began to question her emotional responses. Why didn't she cry on camera? Why did she appear so composed? Why wasn't she seen actively searching for her daughter in the hours after the disappearance? These questions began to replace the original sympathy. Tabloids like the Daily Mail ran suggestive headlines. Was it the parents? The Sun followed with accusations of sedation. Did the McCanns sedate their children? The media began to pry into every detail of Kate's demeanor, turning her expressions, or lack thereof, into public suspicion. What emerged was a public image deeply split in two. On one side stood those who defended her, people who believed she had endured the unimaginable. A mother crucified by media for not displaying the right kind of grief. They saw her as a victim twice over, first of tragedy, then of judgment. On the other side were those who believed Kate's emotional restraint was not the result of trauma, but of control, perhaps even concealment. To them, she was not grieving, but performing. Not broken, but calculating. That divide widened when analysts began to examine Kate's behavior more closely, not just what she did, but what she didn't do. On the night Madeleine disappeared, multiple witnesses reported that Kate did not participate in the search. While others combed the resort, ran to the beach, and knocked on neighbors' doors, Kate remained in the apartment, seated on Madeleine's bed. Some called it shock. Others called it avoidance. In the days that followed, she refused to answer 47 out of 48 formal questions posed by Portuguese police. Simple, factual questions about her actions, her memories, and the hours surrounding Madeleine's disappearance were met with silence. She often deflected responsibility through collective language, saying, "What? When?" would have revealed more. She rarely mentioned Madeleine by name, and when she did, it was often without emotional weight. Peter Hyatt, a specialist in statement analysis, noted, "She doesn't lie with her words. She lies by not saying the things that need to be said." His evaluation focused on the evasiveness in her speech, the emotional detachment, and her tendency to shift agency, traits, he argued, that are common in individuals who are withholding information or constructing a version of events. Still, these behaviors, no matter how suspicious they appeared, never led to a conviction. In fact, Kate McCann has never been formally charged with any crime. From a legal standpoint, she is not a criminal. She was, for a time, a formal suspect in Portugal, but that status was lifted due to lack of sufficient evidence. No forensic proof linked her to Madeleine's disappearance. No confession, no eyewitness. And yet, the suspicion never fully disappeared. Gonçalo Amaral, the lead detective in the original Portuguese investigation, has publicly maintained his belief that Kate and Jerry McCann were involved in concealing their daughter's death. He published a book outlining his theory that Madeleine died in the apartment and that her parents staged an abduction to cover up an accident. The McCanns sued Amaral for defamation. But in a ruling that stunned many, the Portuguese Supreme Court sided with Amaral, affirming his right to publish the theory based on available investigative material. In essence, the court did not accuse Kate of guilt, but it validated that the theory had legal grounds to exist. This leaves Kate McCann in a strange limbo, legally innocent, publicly doubted, behaviorally ambiguous. She exists in a gray area where the law has cleared her, but many hearts and minds have not. So how do we interpret her silence, her avoidance, her control? A fair analysis must consider both sides of the argument. On one hand, silence does not equal guilt. Trauma manifests differently in every person. Some mothers scream, others go numb. It is entirely possible that Kate's calm demeanor was the result of severe emotional shock, or that her refusal to answer police questions came from legal advice, not deception. It is possible she was trying to protect herself, not hide something sinister. The world is quick to judge women, especially mothers, for not grieving the way they're expected to. But on the other hand, silence, when paired with contradictions and missing information, becomes more than just a coping mechanism. It begins to look like a wall, carefully built, carefully guarded. Kate's silence wasn't momentary. It was consistent. It wasn't limited to media appearances. It extended into police interviews, courtroom affidavits, and even public memorials. That consistency, coupled with her emotional distance, created an image that many found too calculated, too rehearsed, too precise to be accidental. As one commentator said, "It's not just the silence. It's what the silence is surrounded by." Ultimately, the case of Madeleine McCann remains unsolved. And so does the mystery of her mother. Was Kate McCann a woman broken by tragedy, caught in the cruel machinery of public opinion? Or was she a mother who knew more than she ever dared to say? The truth may never be known, but the questions remain. Because in cases like this, silence is not an answer, it is a presence. And sometimes, it's the loudest one in the room. 16 years have passed since the night of May 3, 2007. The Ocean Club apartment in Praia da Luz has long been cleaned, repainted, and re-rented. The headlines have faded, the news cycles have moved on. But the questions, those quiet, persistent questions, have never truly gone away. Kate and Jerry McCann were never charged with a crime. No body was ever found. No suspect has ever been tried. And yet, to this day, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann remains one of the most scrutinized and polarizing missing persons cases in the world. We have seen media spectacles, private investigations, state-level interventions, and countless theories, but no closure. What remains are loose threads, pieces of a puzzle that never fit, and questions that no amount of PR or legal counsel could fully silence. If Kate and Jerry were truly innocent, why not answer simple, factual questions? Why did Kate refuse to say where she searched? Why couldn't she describe what she saw, touched, or felt in the most critical minutes after Madeleine was found missing? Why delete phone records that could have helped retrace their steps? Silence in grief is understandable. But silence in key moments of investigation, strategic, repeated, and consistent, is harder to explain. And if they were guilty, how did they manage to walk free? How did an entire system, one that includes police, politicians, legal authorities, and media consultants, fail to uncover the truth? Was it a failure of evidence, a failure of will, or a decision somewhere along the chain to protect image over investigation? And then comes the final, haunting question. The one that still appears on posters, in prayers, and across candlelit vigils: where is Madeleine McCann? That question still carries weight because it was never truly answered. Not in courtrooms, not in interviews, not in documents stamped by police or sealed by governments. The world has heard theories. We've heard arguments, defenses, and denials. But what we haven't heard, clearly, openly, and without deflection, is the truth. Maybe the truth was lost that night. Maybe it was buried in panic, shielded by fear, or protected by power. Or maybe it's still out there, hidden not in what was said, but in what wasn't. In the end, we leave this story where we found it full of unknowns. Not to accuse, not to judge, but to remember that in the silence of this case, something still speaks. And perhaps, the most important question is not what happened that night, but who still dares to ask. So we turn the final question to you, the viewer, the listener, the seeker of truth. What do you believe? Because sometimes, the answers don't lie in what's said out loud. Sometimes, the truth lives in the things we choose never to say,